Hi, and welcome back. This video is part of the free Blazor Crash Course. In this crash course, we built an actual Blazor WebAssembly application based on .NET 5. In this video, we will implement a Modal Dialog component that we can use everywhere in our application. We learn how to use arguments in event callbacks, and we learn about the power of reusable components. Hi. I'm a software engineer with more than 10 years of experience with the .NET platform. In this crash course, we focus on Blazor web app development. Let's take a look at what we're going to build. In the completed FinanceMentor application, we want to use Modal Dialogs to interact with the user. On the earnings page, we have a list of all the entries on the left. In the last column, we have a delete button. We don't want to delete rows accidentally. That's why we ask the user for confirmation when the delete button gets clicked. If we hit the cancel button in the Modal Dialog, nothing happens. On the other hand, if we confirm and press the delete button in the dialog, the application removes the row from the table. That's what we're going to build in this video. We will implement a Modal Dialog component and use it on the earnings page of the FinanceMentor application. Let's jump into Visual Studio and create the Modal Dialog component. First of all, let's create a new Razor component in the Components folder. We right-click the Components folder and add a new Razor component. In the new item dialog, we name the component Modal Dialog. We press the Add button and Visual Studio closes the dialog and creates a new file. First of all, I insert the code snippet with the template of the Modal Dialog. As we did in the previous video of this series, we use Bootstrap to build the user interface. Bootstrap offers predefined CSS classes that we can use to create a Modal Dialog component. Before we change the template and make it more dynamic, let's use the Modal Dialog component on the earnings page. On the earnings page, we scroll down to the end of the template definition and add a reference to the Modal Dialog component. Let's start the application and take a first look at our Modal Dialog component in action. When we navigate to the earnings page, the Modal Dialog appears on the screen. I would say it looks great. However, we cannot interact with the dialog yet. It doesn't matter if you click on the OK button or press the cross in the dialog's top right corner. Also, we see static text and a static title in the dialog. Let's head back to Visual Studio to make the component more dynamic and useful. Back in Visual Studio, we open the Modal Dialog component. First of all, let's create properties to hold the title and the text of the dialog. Again, we want to make those properties available when using the component in another component. Therefore, we add the parameter attribute to the property definitions. Next, we replace the static text with the variables we just created. Remember to use the @ symbol in front of the variable name. Now that we have the basic properties set up, let's add some behavior to the component. We want to build a component that can be used in different places across the application. That's why we cannot implement business-specific code in this component. Instead, we let the caller of our component decide what to do based on how the user interacts with the Modal Dialog component. Let's define another parameter for our Modal Dialog component. This time, we use the event callback type again. But other than in the previous video, we also use the generic type argument and define the onClose property as event callback of Boolean. Next, let's implement methods that we can bind to the template and execute the onClose callback. We start by implementing a private modal cancel method. The implementation is simple. We use the onClose callback and call its invoke async method and provide false as its argument. Next, we implement a private modal OK method. Again, we use the onClose callback and call its invoke async method. However, this time we provide true as its argument. Now let's bind those methods to the template. For the close button on the top right corner defined on line 6, we add the onClick attribute and use the modal cancel method. Again, make sure to use the @ symbol in front of the method name. We do the same for the OK button, except that we bind the modal OK method instead. Before we can test the component again, we need to adjust the code in the earnings page where we use the component. Let's start by creating a bool property that we can use to decide if the earnings page should show the modal dialog. We define a delete dialog open property of type bool. Next, we change the template and use an if statement to show the modal dialog only when the delete dialog open property is true. Now, let's add the missing arguments to the modal dialog. We set the title and the text properties. For the onClose property, we define a reference to the onDeleteDialogClose method we're going to implement next. The onClose argument is not provided by IntelliSense. It turns out I forgot to add the parameter attribute in the definition. Let's head back to the modal dialog component and fix that. Back in the earnings page, let's implement the onDeleteDialogClose method. We define a private onDeleteDialogClose method with a single argument of type bool. The argument contains the information on whether the user has confirmed or cancelled the dialog. In this method, we set the delete dialog open property to false and call the status changed method. Last but not least, we implement the private open delete dialog method returning void. In this method, we set the delete dialog open property to true. Now, we need to use the open delete dialog method in the template. Let's create another column in the table to hold the delete button. I prepared another snippet for the delete button itself. Now that's everything in place, let's start the application again. Let's navigate to the earnings page once again. This time, we see the new column with the delete button. When we click on the button, the modal dialog opens. If we click on the OK button or the cross in the top right corner, the modal dialog closes. That's exactly what we wanted to see and how we implemented it. Now that the modal dialog component works as expected, let's freshen up what we learned in the previous video and implement API handling to remove the entry from the data store. First of all, open the earnings controller class. I insert a snippet for the delete method. Again, this course focuses on Blazor web app development and not on ASP.NET Web API. Nonetheless, we create a method that handles the HTTP delete request and identifies an item using its ID. Back in the earnings page component, let's define a private field of type earning that will contain the item that we want to remove. We call it earning2delete. Next, let's change the signature of the openDeleteDialog method and add an argument of type earning to it. Within the method, we set the earning instance we get as a method argument to the earning2delete field. We now need to fix the template where we call the openDeleteDialog method and provide the earning item as an argument to the method. As the last step, we actually need to call the API and remove the item from the storage. In the onDeleteDialogClose method, we use the HTTP client to delete the item. After we remove the item, we want to reload the data and set the earning2delete field to null. Remember, we only want to remove the item when a user accepts the modal dialog. To implement that, we move our code in an if statement. If the user cancels the dialog, we still want to set the delete dialog open property to false. That's why we leave this statement out of the if block. Let's run and test the application again. Once again, we open the earnings page and click on the first item's delete button in the list. When I click on the cross, nothing happens. I click on the delete button again, but this time I press the OK button and the item gets removed from the table. Excellent! We implemented a modal dialog component that we can use everywhere in our Blazor application. But we can do even better. Let's improve the Modal Dialog component to make it even more flexible to use. We are missing a cancel button, and depending on the scenario, we might want to have different buttons in our Modal Dialogs. Therefore, we add a Modal Dialog type to our Modal Dialog component. In the Modal Dialog component, we create a public enum Modal Dialog type with the values OK, OK cancel, and delete cancel. Next, we create a property of this type for the component and mark it with the parameter attribute. Now it's time to change the template. Instead of always showing the OK button, we use a switch statement to render the buttons depending on the dialog type. For the OK type, we render the OK button like we already had before. For the OK cancel type, we also render a cancel button in addition to the OK button. And for the delete cancel type, we render a button of type danger and change the label to delete. Last but not least, let's head back to the earnings page. In the earnings page, we add the dialog type argument to the Modal Dialog component reference and provide the delete cancel option. Let's start the application again. As you can see, when I click on the delete button, we now have a Modal Dialog with two buttons, including a red delete button on the right. Congratulations! You successfully implemented a very flexible Modal Dialog component that we can share across our application and use whenever we want to interact with the user. This video is the fourth part of the free Blazor Crash Course. You learned how to implement a reusable Modal Dialog component. You learned how to render a component conditionally. We learned how to bind a click handler method to the component template. We learned how to use the generic type argument of the event callback type to provide data to its caller. In the next video of this series, we will take a look at how to use and handle CSS in Blazor applications to style your components. Tell me in the comments what you like about Blazor and what you want me to explain next. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this free Blazor Crash Course, and see you in the next video.